I'm here to tell you the story of Haag Farm Walnuts, a walnut orchard that supports birds, not as its first goal, but as a bonus to our operation raising walnuts. We have pest suppression because of the birds and predatory insects. We didn't always have an orchard. We bought the property in 1979, and my husband's plan was to use integrated pest management. We would employ bugs to eat other bugs that were harmful, avoiding chemical applications of pesticide. We wanted to put in plants that would provide a welcome home for predatory insects that would take care of pest management for us. You don't have to pay them, you don't have to buy them, they come on their own and they do the job. The plants we put in were 4 initially: ceanothus, coyote bush, buckwheat, and toyon. This provided pollen and nectar throughout the calendar year.
Colleagues and I were looking at the effects of growing hedgerows on the edges of all types of different crops in the Sacramento Valley of California. Codling moths in the winter build cocoons underneath bark flakes and in fissures of deeply furrowed trees. And the codling moth is a pest, creates a lot of damage in walnut orchards and apples and other stone fruit. We actually showed that if hedgerows were a part of a much larger landscape that had other types of woody vegetation and grassland and native oaks and those sorts of things, that did increase the predation service by birds in the adjacent crops. 35% of those larvae were most likely consumed by birds. And we confirmed that by looking at videos and by looking at the actual peck marks on the larvae themselves. Those included Nuttall's woodpeckers and also the white-breasted nuthatch, which has a little tiny needly bill that probes in and out of the bark and takes out those little codling moth larvae. Other types of woodpeckers in our system included northern flickers, hairy and downy woodpeckers, chickadees, and bush tits.
The Nuttalls are here in the very early spring, end of winter. Sometimes 3 of them together on the same tree, moving around and hammering and making little small holes and inspecting each other's work and then flying off, and next morning they'll come back. A little bit later, we have mockingbirds move in. We had a lot of white-crowned sparrows. Hummingbirds showed up, and then the red-winged blackbirds, starlings, some bluebirds, not many. They're deeper into the walnut rows. We have owls, the occasional hawk, mostly red shoulders.
So it turns out that birds like woodpeckers and white-breasted nuthatches, for example, spend time in orchards because that's where their food sources are and that's where shelter is in the winter, where more codling moths were eaten by birds when the trees were taller, wider, and had deeper bark furrows. So basically older trees. So there's 3 things going on. The birds are attracted to vegetation in the landscape, to hedgerows on the edge of the farm, and to the crop itself, which was a big surprise for me. On the farm, you might think about planting a hedgerow or retaining some trees along the edges of your grove, or even retaining an old walnut tree when you're turning over your orchard to another crop that could encourage birds. And therefore they might spread their service to other smaller trees that also still have codling moth.
I think it was RCD and these other groups, and they selected the plants that would go around the pond, all natives, all of them. The only thing I said was, do not plant in rows. I don't want anything planted in a row. Make it uneven, make it scattered. It's not an industrial planting, for heaven's sakes. It looks like a jungle out there now.
At the landscape scale, you can talk to your friends, encourage them to do the same thing. Maybe try to attach your hedgerow to an area that's already existing habitat, so you're increasing that connectivity in your farm with the larger landscape.
You don't have to have things well groomed to be successful with wildlife. If you're continually cleaning things up and mowing and snipping and sweeping and raking, you're not going to have as much variety as you will have if you leave it alone.
I really like to think about ways that are not antagonistic, but ways that we can work together with the systems that we have and the needs that we have in order to create a world that we all want to live in and that provide habitat and food and environment and shelter for the other animals that we share the planet with.